This is the last week of our series on introductions to Jewish works. And this week we will be looking at the Mishnah Brura. So again, we'll follow the same structure. I'll give a short bio. We'll then go through parts of the introduction to Mishnah Brura. And we'll hopefully give one example to just show what exactly he's trying to do. And then at the end, I mentioned last time that the Mishnah Brura was a contemporary of the Aruch HaShulchan. So if we have some time, hopefully we'll have a chance to compare those two works and see how they, I guess, approached halacha and what they wanted to do. So just a short bio. So the Mishnah Brura was written by Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Kagan. He lived in Poland from 1838 till 1933. He actually lived to the age of 95. So he was an old man when he passed away. He did not accept a rabbinical position of any kind in terms of a city. He had more of a yeshiva. People came to learn with him, and at some point he supported himself by a store that his wife ran. Over his life, he wrote many books. He wrote 20 books. So Mishnah Brura is maybe better known as the Chofetz Chaim, all the same person. And he's known as the Chofetz Chaim because he wrote a book called the Chofetz Chaim, dealing with the laws of Lashon Hara. He wrote a book called Chofetz Chaim dealing with laws of Lashon Hara. He wrote another book called Shmiras HaLashon, I think, which deals more the hashkafic ideas, why it's not good to speak Lashon Hara. He has many other books. I'll just explain a few. His one book, Nidchei Yisrael. So Nidchei Yisrael means the dispersed of Israel. So he actually wrote a book meant for the Jews who moved. He lived, I guess, in Eastern Europe, but for the Jews who are moving to North America and to England, and where a lot of them were dropping their Yiddishkeit along the way, so he wrote a book to kind of strengthen them. Hopefully they'll strengthen their observance. He wrote another book called Machaneh Yisrael, the Camp of Israel. That was meant for the Jews who were enlisted into the Russian army. And he also wrote many other books, halachic works, and the common theme among many of his works is that he was trying to strengthen the following of mitzvos and Torah study.
Was he a Hasidic?
No, he was yeshivish. He was a Litvak. And I think a lot of this is based on the times. He lived in the 19th century. The 19th century for the Jews in Europe was, I don't know how to explain it, volatile in the sense that there was a lot going on. There was secularism, industrialism, everything's going on together. Many Jews are leaving the shtetl, going to live in bigger cities, a lot of assimilation.
But it was also the heyday of European Jewry in terms of learning and yeshiva.
Well, yes and no. Part of this is, I think, it depends who you ask. Part of it is, I'm not a historian, so I don't want to tell you exactly, but some sectors really build it up as the heyday, and some people say, that's a bit of a myth, that it wasn't necessarily the heyday that we make it out to be.
No, I hear heyday here, but
and we'll see in
Europe in terms of.
So it could be, but at the same time, they were under a lot of stress, and they were struggling. So a lot of his books were meant for that. He also was involved with the starting of the BAYT movement. He didn't officially start it, but he gave his haskama, and I think a lot of people look at his haskama, maybe it's the most important one to that movement. And he did it for the same reason that he didn't think the girls were getting enough education at home, and they too were struggling. He thought there was a need to finally give them formal education. So that's dealing more with his other works. So back to Mishnah Brura. So the Mishnah Brura, what is the Mishnah Brura? It's a commentary on the Orach Chaim section of the Shulchan Aruch. We said there are 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch. Orach Chaim dealing with many of the laws pertaining to daily life, prayer, a lot of prayer, and not necessarily daily, but also Shabbos and holidays, as like that. That's one of the sections of the Shulchan Aruch, and the Mishnah Brura is a commentary specifically on that section. It's split up into 6 different volumes. So Orach Chaim has about 690, I think, 6 simanim. So split into 6 different volumes. It was published between 1896 and 1907. And even though we're going to look at his Hakdama to the Mishnah Brura as whole, the 3rd and 4th Chalakim sections of the Mishnah Brura deal specifically with the laws of Shabbos. And he actually has a special Hakdama for those 2 Chalakim, I guess, for the idea of Shabbos. Not going to have time to deal with that, but also an interesting read there as well. So now just to move on to his introduction, I'm going to sum up his first part, which I didn't put on the source sheet, and then we'll pick up in the middle. And in the first part of his Hakdama, he talks about the importance of Torah study. And it says that the same way the physical body requires sustenance, it requires its food, so too the spiritual body requires its food. And what is that? obviously learning Torah. And he says, as long as the neshama, your soul, is part of the body, so it can survive, because as your body survives, your neshama kind of goes along with it. But as soon as you pass away and your body and soul split up, so your soul hopefully lives forever, and it needs its nourishment. So what its nourishment? Again, its nourishment is studying Torah and following the commandments. And then at the end of this section, he makes an important point. He says that they're really the same thing. Food for your soul and food for your body, physical body, are as important as each other. In the same way, if you're starving for food, you'd do anything in your power to get food in order to stay alive. He's saying so too, you should really strive. If you're not getting any spiritual sustenance, any food, you should strive and make sure to be able to get your spiritual sustenance. So I think it's interesting how he's starting off his Hakdama and his idea of the importance of learning Torah, and I think it might fit well into his other works, in this idea of people struggling at the time, maybe not being able to live up to their fullest potential in terms of Torah study and performance of mitzvahs, and therefore he's coming again at the beginning of his Hakdama to Mishnah Berurah to strengthen that idea. That's what he does in the beginning, and now I want to pick up in the middle. And now he's talking about the importance of studying Torah, and this is in source number 1, Aleph, and the section I call Limud Hamivi L'Yidei Maaseh, studying for the goal of being able to perform mitzvahs as a result. So he says, V'hinei afshel limud Torah hu shekol ma she'adam lomed. Even though the commandment of studying Torah applies to every single aspect of Torah, afilu b'kodesh v'taros, even the laws dealing with ritual purity and the laws dealing with the sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash, which again are not relevant nowadays, but there's still a lot written on them. There's a lot to study in those areas. And if you do study those areas, he says, Hu mekayem mitzvahs aseh de Talmud Torah. You fulfill your commandment of studying Torah. There's no question. But he says, Mikol makom ikar limud ha'adam. The most important thing that a person should be learning, sarich lios belimud hamivi lidei maaseh, has to be in the realm of your study should be in the realm of actions which you must perform. V'al korchach amru chazal, and therefore our rabbis taught us, Ohev Hashem, quoting Ohev Hashem Sharei Tzion Mikol Mishkenos Yaakov, that Ohev Hashem Sha'arim HaMitzuyim B'Halacha, that God loves the gates that are filled with, I guess, the halacha, Jewish law, Yosem Mibate Knes Yosef Bate Midrashos. She loves it more than, I guess you say, shuls, where people daven. I don't know why he loves it necessarily more than Bate Midrash, because what you're doing in there is learning. I'm not sure what he means by that. And he says, V'ayin b'yoredeya b'shach sham shehevi b'shem aprisha, and he quotes the commentary of the Shach, who's one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, L'tzari kol adam lilmod halachos b'chol yom, that you have to learn halacha, you have to learn Jewish law every day, K'dei she'alimud yiviyenu l'idei maseh, in order that your learning will bring you to be better at performing your actions, performing mitzvos. And then just to skip to the next paragraph, V'hinei lefizeh, so according to what I'm saying, so the first thing you should learn is the section of Orach Chaim, the section pertaining to, again, tefillah and the laws relating to waking up in the morning, and Shabbos and the holidays, things that necessarily come up every day, every week, every year. That should be the first thing you learn. You said even though the Shulchan Aruch, when he wrote his book, we compared the Shulchan Aruch to the Rambam. So the Rambam, when he wrote his book on Jewish law, it was on all aspects of Torah, that which we perform nowadays and that which only applies in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. And we said Rabbi Yosef Karo, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he only wrote on the laws that are relevant nowadays. So everything that the Shulchan Aruch wrote is relevant. Mikol makom chelek zehu mukdam. Out of all that which is relevant, the one that's most relevant is Orach Chaim. Because the knowledge of Orach Chaim is relevant every single day. Every day of your life. Because if you don't know Orach Chaim, Lo yarim ish ha'Yisraeli es yado v'esraglo. You can't even get out of bed, he's saying, because the first thing you have to know how to get out of bed. You have to wash the Tilas Yadayim, you have to say brachas, you have to know these are all laws that are written in Orach Chaim, and if you don't know it, you can't get out of bed. So he's saying this is the most important thing to learn. You can say that yeshivas nowadays don't necessarily agree with this, because
is that sort of what he's saying, is that the yeshivas are doing esoteric studies, let's say, for argument's sake.
It doesn't have to be esoteric, but
doing Gemara.
But it's not, let's say, relevant. I mean, if you learn besides the sukkah, it wouldn't help you build a sukkah.
Correct.
No, but you think what he's saying is here you should be spending your day learning halakha.
Correct. Yeah, and
so
even the yeshivas in his days, I don't think Volozhin, they weren't doing that in Volozhin, which is around in those days. And certainly nowadays, if you go to any yeshiva, most yeshivas, when you're learning 8 to 10 hours of Gemara a day, you're not touching halakha. A lot of people don't touch halakha until maybe they start smicha. Or if they don't, then they might never touch. They might do half-hour Mishnah Berurah a day, but they're not doing serious study. So it's funny how he's making the push for halakha.
When he said that it's better than the Beit Midrash, there's your answer.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good answer. Maybe. I wonder. Okay, good. That's great. So that's how he's saying. So obviously he's writing his commentary first on Orach Chaim because he thinks it's the most important thing to learn. And now the whole second section, let's skip to the second section, is going to sound very, very familiar because we start with the Rambam, who was the 12th century, we moved to the 16th century, now we're already in the 19th century, and these same problems are occurring that seems like people are always struggling to be able to learn. And it says, Va'ach ka'asher nisponein. But if we're going to look at the reality, nireh she'avonosenu harabim, with all of our sins, mu'atima anashim hakovim limudam lazeh. There are very few people who set aside time to learn these halachos. V'hainu av ha'anashim asher naga elokim b'libam, and even the people who, there's a godly part in them, and they want to be learning. V'rotzim lischazek b'ma'uz Torah. They want to be learning more. U'v'kiyu mitzvaseha. V'la'anashim ka'elu, and for these people, hayamin hara'ui shekodem kol halimudim, that the first thing they should be learning, hayatzarich lios baki b'chelek hazeh. Obviously, they should be experts in Orach Chaim because that's their everyday life. Kedei leida es haderech asher yelech ba. You would think this would be the first thing they would be learning, and everyone would be baki in this. Everyone would be an expert in this. V'chatarti, and I dug, I really did my investigation. Ladas siva hadavar. I wanted to figure out the reason why nobody was learning. Umatzasi hishtaim heina. And there are two reasons why nobody's learning. What would you, based on what we've seen earlier, what would you think those two problems are? I feel like these are both problems we've seen.
No access to
He hasn't talked about no access to books, but
no time, no money.
So he doesn't even mention those, but you would think
too much or too complicated.
Yeah, you could say right. You could say this idea of being too either too much or too complicated, and this idea that again he wrote at the same time the Aruch HaShulchan, so similar that how many years it's already been since the Mishnah since the Rav Yosef Karo and Rav Moshe Isserles wrote the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. It's already been 300 years, so there have already been a lot of books and. They wrote their opinions, but now those opinions have already become 5 opinions again. And even if you know where to look, you're going to struggle. So let's see what he writes. So he says, I have two answers. Achas, the first, Shulchan Aruch levado. If you study the Shulchan Aruch itself, bilti limud hatur. Again, we said how did the Shulchan Aruch come about? You have Rav Yaakov Turim wrote his book of halacha. Then the Rav Yosef Karo went ahead and wrote this encyclopedic work. Right, trying to summarize everything. The Torah wrote some of the opinions, and he wrote what he could the BAYT Yosef, which is all the opinions. And then he said that was too long, and since it was so long, nobody's able to learn from there. So he condensed it all into the Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch, we said, was very condensed without giving all the reasons behind it, like the BAYT Yosef. So he's coming ahead and telling us that you can't learn the Shulchan Aruch without learning the Torah. And it's like a Sefer Chasum. It's like a sealed book if you're not learning the Torah. Kia BAYT Yosef. Rav Yosef Karo, Kishesidi Shulchan Aruch, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he thought you were going to be learning the sources of all of these halachos. Bitur BAYT Yosef. He thought you were going to learn the Torah, you were going to learn the BAYT Yosef, and after you're familiar with all of the Gemaras and all of the different commentaries on the Gemara, you're familiar with everything that's written, then you'll know the halacha. Then you're going to go ahead and read the Shulchan Aruch and see what the final word is.
Actually, but he condensed it because it was too much for people to
right, but so that's what we discussed this at the time. When he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, did he mean for it to be studied together or separately? So obviously the Mishnah Berurah says no, you can't study one without the other. Ach, la'asher shebetur BAYT Yosef nimtza lif'amim Kama deas chalukim b'chol din v'din. Right, but since again, when Rabbi Yosef Karo, right, there were so many opinions in the Tur and the Beis Yosef, there's so many different opinions written. So what did he do? L'kach arach lefanenu shulchano hatahor. So he had to condense it. He had to make it easier to read, so we would know what the final halacha is. Leida halacha l'maisa b'chol din v'din. Aval lo hayadato shenilmod oso bilchud. He never intended for it to be studied by itself. Ki ein hadin yuchal isyashiv heite b'dasa adam. A person can actually be an expert in halacha if he doesn't know all the reasons behind it. So that's one problem. One problem is that you need to learn the Shulchan Aruch with the Beis Yosef and the Tur. And then the second part of that problem is that, but it's too long and nobody can actually learn that. So even though you have to learn one with the other, since you can't learn the other, you can't really learn Shulchan Aruch. So that's one problem. And then if you skip to the second paragraph in source number Bays, Siba Shnia. You can explain the second reason. What's the second reason? Siba Shnia Shagaram Limat Limur Shulchan Aruch Lidati. And a second reason which caused to the fact that nobody's learned Shulchan Aruch, Mifnei Shekabed Hadavar Ma'od. It's very difficult to know. Leida Mimenu Hadin Lamase. It's even though the Shulchan Aruch, we're saying, wrote the final word and you think that's the final halacha, if you read what he says, it's very difficult to then determine what the actual law should be. Why? Because again, it's been 300 years and there have been many commentaries written. There have already been many commentaries written on the Shulchan Aruch, and they all have their different opinions of what the Shulchan Aruch actually meant to say. So if they all have their different opinions, so the Shulchan Aruch now, one word has become again 5 opinions. He doesn't know turn right or left. He doesn't know which opinion to follow. And if you want to say, I have a good solution, just always be strict. If you're always strict, then you're definitely fine. It says, that's not a good answer. Phrase that comes up a lot, because if every time you're going to be strict on something, sometimes inevitably that leads you to be lenient on another halacha. If you want to be so strict sometimes if you're going to be so strict on the way you want to, let's say, it's a very simplistic example, but you're going to be so strict on the way you're going to serve God, sometimes you might be lenient on the way you treat man. Would they be that contradictory, the halachas? I mean, what do you mean? That you said, which way to go, right? This way or that way, right? Yeah. That gives the impression, though, that there'd be contradiction. Sometimes Shulchan Aruch will write something, and the commentaries will explain he means this, and somebody will say no, he doesn't mean. That's what I mean. I see. The Shulchan Aruch wrote. There've been he's going to go ahead and list all these commentaries. Yeah. There've been numerous. You're not saying that the actual works of halacha are contradicting. Well, people have different opinions which contradict each other. But an opinion on the works as opposed to the.
And sometimes there are contradictions within the works.
Well, okay.
Sometimes they'll say that this is much the Yeshang with the Sasa.
Yeah.
In one halacha. So then, what do you actually do? What's the right thing to do? Right.
That you're right. Correct. There's right. For example, the Shulchan Aruch sometimes in the Shulchan Aruch will quote 2 opinions. So generally, you assume sometimes they'll quote one opinion and say v'yesh omrim, and some will say and quote another. General rule is stam v'yesh omrim. If he has one opinion and then he has yesh omrim, you follow the first opinion. You don't follow the yesh omrim. But that's not always true. And some of the commentaries say no. Different. It all goes back to knowing the sources, because sometimes if you actually know the sources and the reasons for the din, I'll try to hopefully bring this, show this point when we show one example from Hilchos Chanukah. But the Shulchan Aruch will write something and it's not really so clear what exactly he means. Yes.
I think when he's referring to Chumrah being a kula, he means, as an example, something which is more stringent in one area, the same definition is less stringent in another. Like if you say you want to be stringent and you say it's too late to daven mincha now. The implication is that now you can daven Mariv, even though that's a kula, it may be too early for Mariv. Or you say you have to start Shabbos earlier, but that may mean that you end it earlier as well. So what starts off as being chumrah, so you want to say someone wants to be stringent, it should be okay. It's not necessarily okay, right? Because many stringencies have a lack of stringency at the other end, but the same definition.
Okay. That's true. So just to go to the third paragraph here, and just to finish off this point, Odra isi vis bonanti, and again, I've been looking into it, I've been searching, Kimi eish sheliket v'kitzer habe'er hetev es divrei hatazu magen Avram. So there's a work called the Be'er Hetev. The Be'er Hetev was written, I have it here, by Rabbi Yehuda Ashkenazi. So what the Be'er Hetev does, in general, if we look at a page of Shulchan Aruch, there are often two main commentaries, you could say, on the Shulchan Aruch. So when it comes to Orach Chaim, for example, the two main commentaries are the Magen Avraham and the Taz, the Turei Zahav. I think they both live in the 17th century. So what the Be'er Hetev did is he lived in the 18th century, is that he summarized those two opinions. Sometimes it could be long, he kind of took home the main point of what each one did and summarized that. That was his job. So you could think, fine, that's great. The Be'er Hetev is kind of summarizing all these different opinions. But he's saying, that's very good. He did do a great job of summarizing those opinions. It's already been 130 years since he wrote that. So now again, 130 years, there have been a lot of new works written. And from then until now, there have been many great and famous commentaries, for example, the Eliyahu Rabbah, Matei Yehuda, Muammar Mordechai, quotes all these different books are written as commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. Just showing again the problem of it's not necessarily a problem, but you have so many books written out there, and it's difficult to know who to follow for the halacha. Right, think about it now. If you have a halacha, if you have a question, let's say for Hilchos Shabbos, so where are you going to look? You might look in the Mishnah Berurah, you might look in the Aruch HaShulchan, you might look in Shmira Shabbos Kihilchasa, you might look in the Shabbos Home written by one of these art scroll books. You can look in 5 different books, and you might get 5 different opinions. So the question is, what do you do? So hopefully you have a rabbi to go ask, so they have their opinion that you're going to follow. But the same problem, he's saying that there's so many books out there, you don't know who to follow, so he kind of wants to give you what his opinion is. So let's go to second page, on to section 3. So now he's going to give us a bit of an explanation of his work. So what are his goals? So his goals are, you can think about it, he saw 2 main problems why people weren't learning. People weren't learning, because you have to learn the Shulchan Aruch with the Tur, and you have to know the reasons behind the law, and it's too difficult for people to learn the reasons, it's too long for them, so they're not learning that. And the second reason, too many opinions. So, as we're going to see, his 2 main objectives are going to be to give the reasons, to try to explain the halacha, but probably in a more condensed version will be easier for people to read. And secondly, he's going to go through these different opinions out there and decide, tell you what the halacha is. So source Gimel. Asher al korchach nis orarti, I stood up, I awakened, benis chazakti, bechasti Hashem yisparach, and I strengthened myself. L'takin es kol eile. I need to fix all these problems. Ki asisi be'ezras Hashem beyor maspik. So I want to come up with a commentary. L'dati al Shulchan Aruch hazeh. So I came out with a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch ad achar hilchos tefillah. So again, he wrote this in 6 volumes, so he obviously wrote this introduction after he finished the first volume, dealing with, let's say, the first 6 of the laws dealing in Orach Chaim. The Karasi Shmo Mishnah Berurah, and I call it Mishnah Berurah. Why is it called Mishnah Berurah? Mishnah Berurah means a clear teaching. He wants to teach us in a clear manner. Uvo bi'arti be'ezras Hashem es kol din v'din. And in it, I've explained every single law, Shebeshulchan Aruch, B'tamo v'nimuko. I'm going to give the reasons behind all the laws. Mi Gemara uposkim, including the Gemara and including the later the rabbis. Asher lo yek kesefer chasim. I don't want it to be a sealed book. If you read the Shulchan Aruch by itself, it doesn't mean anything. So I'm going to give you the reasons. I'm going to explain why the Shulchan Aruch rules as he does. So that's his first objective, dealing with the first problem. And second, Gabiarti bo b'makom shenimtza deos bein haposkim. And I also decided what the opinion should be when they're differing opinions. As a maskana sachronim lahalacha al kol din. Right? If you have 5 different opinions on one matter, I'm going to tell you which one to follow. So that's the first part of his book. Let's skip to the second paragraph. So that's one aspect. Then he says, Uveshule hayiriya, but on the bottom of my work, Pasachti shar, I opened up a gate, meaning he wrote another section. Ushmo shar hatziyun, and I called it the gate of Tziyun, is to designate something, to show something. It's his footnotes on the Mishnah Berurah. So I gave the sources for everything. To tell you who wrote everything. So he wrote the Mishnah Brura, but in it he doesn't really write who says everything, but he has footnotes, and on the bottom in the Shara Tzion he's going to tell you the footnotes. So that's the second part of his work. And let's just skip now to the third paragraph. Gam Chibarti Betzido, he's the third part of his work. Od Perush Echad, one more commentary. Ushmo Beyur Halacha. And I called it Beyur Halacha, the explanation of law. What is he doing here? Bo Yivur Ba'aruka, and here I give long explanation. Kama dinim shekasavti v'Mishnah Brura. Sometimes I'm going to write something in the Mishnah Brura. V'lo haya makom b'shara tzion levara. But there wasn't enough room in the footnote to kind of explain it. So these are maybe the super long footnotes. Some aspects are difficult and there's a lot to write on them. So I have a separate section called Beyur Halacha. V'od kama inanim amukim. So there, in his work, he really has three sections. The Mishnah Brura is the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. The Shar HaTzion is the footnotes, and Beyur Halacha are the matters where he wants to go into more detail. And that's pretty much the main parts of his introduction, explaining what he wants to do with the work. So now, just to try to give an example of what he does, and hopefully give a better understanding of what he's trying to accomplish in these three different sections. So I actually, Dr. Levovsky's suggestion, I actually gave an actual Mishnah Brura. I photocopied on the back so we can have a better idea of what we're looking at next time we do it. So again, the way, just looking at the third page of the source sheet, so the way it's formatted is on the top you have the Shulchan Aruch, and sometimes you have, that's Rabbi Yosef Karo, and sometimes you have the Ramah, whenever the Ramoshe Eshelis had his glosses, so those will be in the smaller print, those are on top. And then you see that there are a lot of different sections over here. So he includes on the page there are three sections which he didn't write and three which he did. So the three which he didn't write is on the left side. You have of the top, top left side, for example, you have the Be'er Hagola. So these are really footnotes on the Shulchan Aruch. So that's written by Rav Moshe Ravkash. Then right beneath it you have the Be'er Heitev. We already quoted him. We said he was Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi. He's the one who summarizes the opinions of the Magen Avram and the Taz, two main commentaries in the Shulchan Aruch. So those are those summaries in the Be'er Heitev. And then we also have the
Where's the Be'er Heitev?
We have the page Shulchan Aruch here. Yeah, sorry. So right underneath on the right side we have the Be'er Heitev. On the left side here you have the Sha'arei Tshuva, written by Rabbi Chaim Mordechai Margolios. He also deals with contemporary questions. I think he lived in the 18th century. So what was at that time? So those are the three works. So that the Mishnah Brura the Rabbi Yisrael Kagan did not write. And then we have the three sections which he did write. The Mishnah Brura we see on the right column, is the Mishnah Brura, his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. On the left side you have the Be'er Halacha where he goes into more detail. And on the bottom we have the Shar HaTzion, we have his footnotes for the Mishnah Brura. So I just want to give one example and try to show what exactly he's trying to accomplish. So if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, on the page on Siman Tafresh Ayin Aleph, Sif Beis, so trying to maybe do something related to Chanukah, it's coming up very soon. So he writes as follows: Kama Neros Madlik. How many candles do you light on Chanukah? So everyone have it. We're on toward the second last line in the Shulchan Aruch. So Balayla Harishon Madlik Echad. On the first day you light one candle. Mikan ve'elach mosli peholech. As the days go on, you light more candles. Second day you light two. Third day you light three. Echad b'chol layla. Right? You add one every day. Ad shebalil achron. Once you get to the 8th day, let's go to the next page. You shmona. Right? The 8th day you're going to light 8 candles. Ve'afilu im rabim b'nei habayis. Even if you have a lot of people in your house, lo yadliku yoser. Don't light any more candles. He's saying one person lights one candle the first day, 2 candles on the second day, etc., etc. Fine, that's the Sephardic custom. If you look in the Ramah, in the small print, right, immediately following the Shulchan Aruch, v'yesh omrim, d'chol echad mibnei habayis yadlik. Everybody in the house should light. V'chein hamenak pashut, and that is the widespread custom. We can stop there. So that actually is, I think now, Sephardim, most of them light, only one person lights candles, say the father, and he lights one candle first night, etc., etc. Ashkenazim, everybody, custom is many families that everybody in the family lights candles. So that's okay. So this is the Shulchan Aruch. But now the Mishnah Brura, so let's go back to page number 3. So I want to go into the Mishnah Brura. In the Mishnah Brura, it's Daled. So there's it's the third. There are two sections of the Mishnah Brura. The second section is the beginning of Taf Reish Ayin Aleph, and then number Daled, which is right next to the big base because that's in the Sif in the Shulchan Aruch. So he's going to explain as follows. For example, according to Shulchan Aruch, seemingly if on the fourth night of Hanukkah you need to light four candles, and if you don't, you would think that maybe you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Let's say you only have one candle on the fourth night. Should you light one candle?
Yes.
Why? You can say, correct, you should. But if you read the Shulchan Aruch, you might not get that picture, because he's saying you should light one on the first night, two on the second, three on the third, four on the... It seems like that might be the mitzvah. The mitzvah might be, on the fourth night you have to light four. If you don't light four, you might not be doing the mitzvah.
Which means you wouldn't be allowed to make a bracha.
Correct. So it's unclear. So let's look at what the Mishnah Brura says. V'im ein yado maseges rak l'ner echad. Let's say you only have enough money for one candle. B'chol laila lo ulveso. So you only have enough for one candle for your whole house. Yatsa bazem midina. You still fulfill your commandment. You still fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles. V'shiura the Shulchan Aruch, and the measurement the Shulchan Aruch gives you that you have to light two on the second night, three on the third night. That's only for somebody who has enough money and can do the best of the best type of mitzvah. So he will light three candles on night 3. But if you don't have three candles, you have one, you should do it, and it's totally fine. You completely fulfilled your mitzvah. K'deisa b'Gemara. So already here the Mishnah Brura is explaining, when the Shulchan, this goes back to the idea, when the Shulchan Aruch writes this, you might think, is the Shulchan Aruch writing this? This is, for example, if you don't do this, if you don't light 4 candles the fourth night, you don't fulfill your mitzvah at all? Or is this maybe only a lechatchila? This is the preferred way, but there's still, I guess, a lower level which you would still fulfill the mitzvah. So the Mishnah Brura is explaining, yeah, you're right. This, when the Shulchan Aruch writes this halacha, this is only the preferred way to fulfill it, but there's a lower level in which you can fulfill the mitzvah as well. And really, so here he gives a bit of an explanation, but now let's look to the Be'er Halacha, where he's going to give an even more thorough explanation to help appreciate more what the sources for this halacha are. So if you look in the Be'er Halacha, so each star is the start of a new topic for him. So the third star on the page, in the bold, it's Balayla Harishona Madlik Echad. Everyone have that? So he says, so he's going to really explain the sources. Amrinam B'Gemara. The Gemara tells you as follows: the mitzvah Chanukah, the mitzvah of lighting candles on Chanukah, ner ish ubeso, which he explains, Rotze Lomar, T'dai ner echa l'chol b'nei beso b'chol laila v'laila. The Gemara tells you the way to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles is each household lights one candle every night of Chanukah. First night of Chanukah, third night of Chanukah, eighth night of Chanukah, you light one candle, you fulfilled your mitzvah. V'hamahadrin, let's say you want to be a bit better, you want to do a higher level mitzvah. Madliki ner l'chol echad ve'echad. So everybody, if you have 10 people live in your house, you light 10 candles every night. You light 10 candles the first night, third night, eighth night. V'hamahadrin min hamahadrin, but the third level, the best type of performing the mitzvah, yom rishon madlik echad. On the first night, you light one candle. Mikan ve'elach mosi ve'holech echad b'chol laila. And then first night you light one candle, second night you light 2 candles, third night you light 3 candles, etc. Ad shebelel acharon yushmona. And then on the 8th night you'll have 8 candles. And ve'hatam, what's the reason for lighting in ascending order? Kineged yamim hayotzim. You want to know how many days have left. Meaning you want to know what night of Hanukkah it is. If you see somebody's house, 2 Hanukkah candles, second night of Hanukkah. V'zeh hayom she'omed bo nimna im hayamim she'atzu kfar. Okay. And then he says in the brackets, "V'hainu shebezeh yedu." With this you will know, v'yizkiru hakol kama yamim yatsa b'asmaras hanes. So for this you'll know the third night. Oh wow, this was corresponding to the third night of the miracle, which happened time of Hanukkah. V'chsheyaskiru zeh shahaya hanes meshach zman rab. And when you're explaining, wow, it's the third night of Hanukkah, it's the 5th night of Hanukkah, yesh bo pirsumei nisa, there's an even greater publication of, publicizing the miracle. B'shevach yoser, it even shows how great God is. The 5th night of Hanukkah, wow, there was a miracle for 5 nights. The 8th night of Hanukkah, wow, you had a miracle for 8 nights. And this is oh Shemali Makodesh. Then he gives another reason the Gemara gives that. Another reason why we like in ascending order. We always try to elevate ourselves. We always try to, when it comes to dealing with I guess holy aspects, we always want to try to elevate yourself. You always go up. So really what the Mishnah Berurah is trying to do in these two sections is he's trying to give a clear explanation for this halacha. Shulchan Aruch writes very clearly, and now what the Mishnah Berurah together, the Be'er Halacha, they're accomplishing is no, he's giving you all the sources. You say in probably fewer words than, let's say, the Torah and the Beis Yosef would do, because that's the point. He's trying to write it, give the reasons, but not write it as long. So that's what he's doing. He's giving you the Gemara. He tells the Gemara really comes up with this three levels of performing the mitzvah. And the Shulchan Aruch is telling you the best way to perform it. But you can go back. You could be a level 1 and still fulfill your mitzvah of Chanukah.
If you went to the Beit Yosef and looked at the Saf, you'd find like this instead of this.
Yeah, it'd be much longer. Because he'd probably quote the Gemara, and he'll probably quote Rashi, and he'll probably quote Tosfos, and he'll probably quote the Rambam, and which is important to know. But I guess we're saying it's too difficult for some people. So I'm going to write it clearly, tell you the Gemara, the basic opinions, and you'll have better understanding of the mitzvah.
Also, when he quotes them, he doesn't just say he actually writes what they say.
Correct. Beis Yosef often quotes, like where he'll actually quote,
like the whole
he'll copy it. Yeah. Meaning, if the Rabbi says it, he'll copy it, and then sometimes he'll explain it, or sometimes. So it's long. So that's the Mishnah Berurah again is trying to, let's say, condense it right in a shorter manner. So I think that I just want to use that to illustrate what the goals of the Mishnah Berurah are. So now, just for the last part of this year, I wanted to compare maybe one aspect, the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, because we said the Aruch HaShulchan was another code written at this time, written pretty much at the exact same time, the late 19th century. He lived in Russia. Aruch HaShulchan, we said, was Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, lived in Russia. The Mishnah Berurah, Rishon Meir Kagan, lived in Poland, both at the end of the 19th century. Aruch HaShulchan, you could say, wrote a code. And the Mishnah Berurah is more of a commentary on a code, but they're very similar. So just to compare a few of them, I know if I ask my father what the difference between the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan is, he'll say
Aruch HaShulchan's more mekel.
Right, the Aruch HaShulchan is more mekel and Mishnah Berurah is more machmir. That's some people like to say. So we'll see if
I don't know if that's true.
So people always said that. I didn't know if it was true. I was actually reading. There's a fellow, Simcha Fishbein, who wrote a PhD on I think he wrote his PhD on the Mishnah Berurah, then wrote a work on the Aruch HaShulchan. I forget which one he did first. He wrote a work on both of them. So he actually made that point. So I guess if he did his PhD and also makes that point, then you would say there has some truth to it.
What is the name, did you say?
Simcha Fishbein. So just to, I guess, compare. So we said the Aruch HaShulchan is a code. Meaning we said the Aruch HaShulchan kind of, he took the Shulchan Aruch. He didn't use the Shulchan. He used the Shulchan Aruch as his basis, but he really wrote his own paragraphs, based on it. But adding on his own things. The Mishnah Berurah says the commentary on a code. In terms of comparing the people, Rav Epstein was a community rabbi. We said he was the rabbi of Dvordik, among other cities. The Chofetz Chaim was not. He was in a yeshiva, which again might also say, if you want to say one's more machmir, more mekel, often the community rabbis are more, say, in the trenches, in the field, and have to deal with more real cases. Often the Rosh Yeshiva, you could say, are different setting. The boys, you're dealing with a community of yeshiva boys, so sometimes you can say, in that sense, it's easier to be machmir if you want to use that as the difference between them. But another point that I saw that Chaim Soloveitchik makes in an article, Rupture and Reconstruction. So he says that one big difference between them is that the Aruch HaShulchan bases many of his rulings on the current reality. I mean, he'll kind of see what are people doing and either try to justify that, what they were doing, try to give a halachic justification, or maybe say it's wrong. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't really. Obviously, there are exceptions. You can't make a general, ironclad rule for this. But almost all of the Mishnah Berurah's rulings are, he's going to go to, if it's written in a sefer, then it can be correct. I mean, he has to go back and find it in another sefer, another book that was written, and therefore then he can write it as part of his commentary. And if not, he won't really talk about it. As opposed to Aruch HaShulchan, he won't necessarily have to go find it written in another book. In order to justify it, he might just see something is done, think it's good enough, and justify it himself. So one interesting point, there's a Shut B'nai Banim is Rav Henkin. I think there was Rav Henkin who lived in New York City. He was a big posek in America. He thinks the Shut B'nai Banim is his grandson. So he actually, in his responsa. So one of the questions that he's asked is, if you have an argument between the Aruch HaShulchan and Mishnah Berurah, who do you follow? So he actually says, I don't know if he means this really, that every time they have an argument, you always follow this rule. He says you should follow the Aruch HaShulchan. And he gives three reasons, some of which we mentioned. He said, first of all, the Aruch HaShulchan said was yoter harif, I think, was sharper, smarter, whatever. However he determines that, I'm not exactly sure. He said the Aruch HaShulchan should be given more weight because the Aruch HaShulchan said wrote a commentary on all four books of Shulchan Aruch, as opposed to Mishnah Berurah, which is limited to Orach Chaim. So we thought that should lend the Aruch HaShulchan more validity. And he also said the Aruch HaShulchan actually published his work a bit later than Mishnah Berurah. So he actually saw what the Mishnah Berurah wrote, and still argued. And there's a concept called halacha kibasrai, that sometimes if you have two people arguing, you should always follow the later opinion, because they kind of saw what everybody else wrote and still decided to argue on them. So he says for that reason you should follow the Aruch HaShulchan. Again, I'm sure people would argue. Nowadays, most people when they learn the Mishnah Berurah, right? So again, in this article, Chaim Soloveitchik writes Rupture and Reconstruction. He talks about this idea that he mentions it, I think briefly, that the Mishnah Berurah is really what's taken over the Aruch HaShulchan. I would say it's a bit unclear why. I'm sure there are many theories out there. Because really, some people, in terms of reading them, it's hard to say which one's easier. I've heard people say Mishnah Berurah is easier to read, Aruch HaShulchan is easier to read. So on that basis, it's hard to say, one's easier to read than the other. But nowadays, you hear the Mishnah Berurah quoted a lot more than the Aruch HaShulchan. But the Aruch HaShulchan is, they're both still well studied. But I just wanted to, in the last few minutes, take one, try to make a comparison dealing with one halacha. And the halacha is eating in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. So if you look at the bottom of page number 2, so just look at the Shulchan Aruch. And source Aleph here, so Shulchan Aruch says, he starts off, Leil Shmini Omer B'Tfilah, so you say, and you insert in the Tfilah, Vatite Lanu Shiyam Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh. You mentioned in Tfilah Shmini Atzeres, fine. Let's skip right to the next line, then there's Ramah's comment here. If the middle of the second line, after the brackets of Uminhagim, so Uvechutza La'aretz, in the diaspora, Ochlim B'Sukkah B'Layla V'Yom. So we eat in the sukkah day and night. You eat in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Mipnei Shu Safek Shvi, because it's really, we're not sure, it might be the 7th day of Sukkot. Ve'en Mevarchin Al Yeshivasa. But you don't make a bracha on eating in the sukkah. U'mekachim Ve'omrim Tzman. Fine. The important part here is that he says you eat in the sukkah on the 7th day, and you don't make a bracha. 8th day, sorry. You make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres because it's a safek, it might be the 7th day. And therefore, you can eat in the sukkah, but you're not going to make a bracha. So just to try to show what the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, how they differ, for example, on this halacha. So if you look at the Mishnah Berurah in source base here, so all he deals with, I'm just going to summarize it outside, that what the Mishnah Berurah deals with is sleeping. He takes it for given, you have to eat in the sukkah. And the question is, do you sleep in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? And he goes back and forth, says maybe you should because it's a safek, but then he actually says that maybe you shouldn't, and why shouldn't you? So he says the reason is because we have an idea about Tosif, you're not allowed to add on to any mitzvahs. So we're kind of stuck here when it comes to the 8th day of Sukkot, of 8th day, because if it's not really Sukkot anymore, and you're eating in the sukkah, then on the one hand it might be Bal Tosif, but on the other hand it's kind of safek 7th day, so maybe it's still Sukkot. So he says when it comes to eating, you can't really tell you're looking for a mitzvah. He says sometimes people like to eat outside. So if people like to eat outside, so when you see somebody eating outside on the 8th day, yeah, he might be doing it for a mitzvah. He might be doing it because he likes to eat outside. So there's nothing so clear about it. So he says for sure eating there is fine. But sleeping, nobody sleeps outside. If you sleep outside, the only reason you're doing that is because you want to perform a mitzvah. So he says, so therefore, if you want to show that the 8th day isn't really like Sukkot, it's a bit different, so you should eat in there, but you shouldn't sleep in there, so people will kind of recognize that it's not really Sukkot, but maybe it is. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah deals with. How many people here eat in the Sukkah both meals on Shmini Atzeres? Okay, I know what our family, what's your minhag? Do you eat it there at all?
Just at night.
Right, just at night.
Yeah.
Just at
I
night.
just make kiddush there.
Okay, just make
But
kiddush.
in Israel, in Israel, you can't even go.
Oh
in.
no, right? Israel's,
They don't.
oh, obviously no, because it's there. It's not sukkah.
It's definitely not.
Right,
They
for
won't
sure.
give, yeah.
But right, so we see that there are all these different customs. So again, if you look at the Aruch HaShulchan, we don't have time to go through it. But he deals with this, meaning he goes through and he says, where did these customs come from? We didn't make them up, right? They're all coming from Europe. And he says, you're right, even though Shulchan Aruch wrote what he wrote, and that's really what the Gemara writes, he says there are all these different customs. There's a custom to eat there at the day, not in the night, or in the night, not during the day, or to make kiddush and then go inside. And he's saying, right, and these all are clearly against what the Gemara says. And the Torah says that these aren't even minhagim. If you have them, you can't follow them because they're not based on anything. But what the Aruch HaShulchan is, he says, no, wait, this is, people are doing this. Let's take, maybe there is merit to what these people are doing. So that's what he tries to do. And he justifies how people do this. And how does he justify it? Going back to something we talked about Aruch HaShulchan too, he justifies by the weather. We actually mentioned this idea of weather in the Aruch HaShulchan 2 weeks ago. And based on the idea we mentioned before, that you don't want to make it as if you're doing another mitzvah. You want to kind of show that there's a difference between the 8th day and the 7 days before it. So he says, you're right. If you're living in a place where there's very nice weather, and you're eating in the sukkah all week, and you're sleeping in the sukkah all week, so how do you show the 8th day is different? You eat, but you don't sleep. He says, where I live in Russia, it's pretty cold. And he says, nobody's sleeping in the sukkah. So all the people are doing the first 7 days are eating. So how are you going to differentiate between the first 7 days and the 8th day? So you have to do something weird on the 8th day. You either eat the day, not in the night not during the day, you make kiddush, go inside. And he says that's the reason for these different customs, and gives justification. And he says these aren't really good reasons. And he says maybe you should follow it. But he at least attempts to justify the practice. I just wanted to show, I don't know for sure, it could be that Poland and Russia, the weather's very different. I might imagine it's not so different. And so you imagine that the Mishnah Berurah was also at the time there were people doing that. But you could say if the Mishnah Berurah is only writing based on, let's say, what the previous Sfarim wrote, so if this minhag doesn't come up in a sefer, so he's not going to talk about it, he's not going to mention it. The Aruch HaShulchan is willing to address, well, he sees it's going on, sees what people are doing, you're right, it may not be written anywhere, but I'm going to try to tackle it, explain what's going on, and address that issue.